meeting. I'd just like to start by recognizing that it's the homeland of the 30 First Nation communities of this area that we call the Fraser Valley Regional District, where we live, work, and learn. Important decisions that we make here at the local government level can affect First Nation communities and Indigenous people and organizations. And so today, as part of our collective responsibility at Commit, we continually examine the work that we do and ensure that we're guided by principles of inclusion, collaboration, and reconciliation. And with that in mind, I'd just like to call to order our January 12th RAPS committee meeting. First item.
Looking for approval of the agenda and late items.
It's moved by Director Facio, seconded by Director Popov. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Opposed if any. Item carries. Next item.
4.1 is a presentation on mosquito control by our favorite contractor, Dirk Lewis of Morrow Bioscience.
No pressure, Dirk. You've now become our favorite contractor. So over to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay?
You can, yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. Lance asked me to come and present to this group. I know a number of you are new, so we're going to do pretty quick run through. I won't keep you too long. If I do go on, I tend to talk at length about mosquitoes. If there's a nudge option, perhaps that's advisable. I will share my screen now. Is that how we're doing it, I think?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
Okay, can everybody see this? Yes? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Quickly, we'll go through just sort of an introduction so that the new folks there can get to know me and our company a little bit. I'll talk a bit about mosquito biology. It's important when we're considering the program and how we manage it. We'll look at last year. Last year was quite a year for mosquitoes. We'll look at a little bit as to why, to help understand kind of the conditions that we're working with. It's too early to do any decent guessing as to what's going to happen in 2023, but we'll show a preview and show you kind of what we look at. And then time for questions and comments. If there's anything during the presentation you want clarification or more, just let me know, and I will watch for hands or listen for voices and try to do my best. So we're Morrow Bioscience. We've been doing mosquito control for over 40 years throughout BC and Alberta. Primarily, we're in BC now. Excuse me, right now we have mosquito control programs as far east as Golden, down through Wassa Lake, Cranbrook, Meadow Creek, Christina Lake, Grand Forks, and then Fraser Valley and Metro Vancouver, just 6 municipalities in Metro Vancouver, and then out at Tsawwassen First Nation. We also do some invasive plant work, so for the Fraser Valley Invasive Species Society and then the Central Kootenay one in the Kootenays. We've done herbicide trials, and we have quite a fantastic researcher on board, and then a bit of habitat assessment, some sort of bird nest studies and that kind of thing. As for me, I'm Dirk, obviously. I've been doing mosquito control for I think 32 years now, most of 32 years. I took a break to work in a mailroom for a while, but mostly just been doing mosquito control. Other team members, sort of the key team members, Morgan is our brilliant research manager. Sean, most of you will either know or get to know Sean. He tends to be the face when mosquitoes are of interest in the news down on the coast. He's got a much better haircut than I do. And then Barry McLean is our GIS manager, and he manages all sort of our data collection. And I could go on a lot about that one, but we do pretty unique data collection just to give us a robust understanding of what's going on and to help us in our control measures. The mosquito control that we do for you folks is primarily floodwater mosquito control. We're in the fortunate position that we don't have a lot of, well, really any measurable mosquito-borne diseases to deal with. So primarily we're dealing with annoyance and then business. The mosquitoes coming out can affect agriculture, definitely affect tourism and golf courses. And then people's recreational capacity down near the Fraser River corridor is impacted, and then barbecues and stuff at home. The thing that makes this area, the Fraser Valley, fairly unique in all the programs that we run is the scope. It's a huge program. It's one of the biggest in BC. It's quite complicated because the interface with residential and business areas is very tight. So it's instantaneous. When there's mosquitoes, we hear about it. And then you have a layer of about 20 feet of blackberries in every mosquito site, which makes it difficult to penetrate the vegetation to get the pesticide down to where the water is. And getting in and monitoring, we leave a lot of blood on the surface down there. One thing that sort of how we do this is we map all the known and the new sites. We know pretty much where the water is going to go. The challenge for us is finding out when it's going to go there. And that depends, we'll talk a little bit about sort of climatic conditions that can alter how the water moves. We monitor the conditions, so we're starting now watching the snow levels. The best guesses on what's going to happen in the spring so that we can anticipate how much pesticide we might need, how much staffing we might need. And then when the season is running, when the freshette's coming through, we're monitoring the larvae. And that's really just to give us a timing on the treatment. So it's, we'll treat at a particular time with the larvae and we try to hit them the most efficiently we can. Then doing the treatments and the post-treatment monitoring, it's important to make sure that the pesticide has worked when we're using it. We don't want to throw it out there and have it, just be for show. And then after that, the mosquitoes come out and our task really shifts to public relations. So talking to people about where the mosquitoes came from, why there's so many. We don't often hear anything when there's very few. So those are sort of the simple years for us. The floodwater mosquitoes themselves are fairly different. These come out, so they're univoltine, which means they have one generation per year. And these eggs are laid on, you can see the photos on the left, they're laid in the grassy and forested areas in the riparian zone along river corridors that tend to flood, particularly during the freshet. These mosquitoes, they come out at 80 million per hectare. You can see the dipper, that's 1 cup, so 250 milliliters of water on the bottom right of that image. And there's probably 600-700 larvae in there. And the entire area would look like that. When you go into a site, it's quite phenomenal sometimes. All the water is just black and moving with mosquitoes. It's impressive and scary all at the same time. These mosquitoes, sort of the biology of them, they come out and they completely overwhelm the system. So we often hear, well, why don't you have more bats or birds? But bats and birds will die when these mosquitoes come out because there's so many of them. They overwhelm the system, do the thing that they need to do, lay the eggs, and then they die, within the month or 2 months. So that's it. That's their existence in the sort of the detectable system for us. Big pink skin, hairless things walking around. Pretty straightforward to monitor them. Really, when you go into a site, if the site is active, the waters come in, the entire site often is just full of mosquitoes. So we'll monitor edges to see the extent of the site so that we can guide ground treatment and then helicopter applications. Fairly easy to target, really. You just got to go into floodwater and they're there. If you're not finding them, then you're not doing it correctly. Often in the early season when we have new staff, they'll be out there flummoxed because they're not finding mosquitoes and they're like, am I doing this right? Am I going to find them? And then, that's on Tuesday. And then on Thursday, they go back to the site and they just freak out because the entire site is full of mosquito larvae. So it's just really that timing. We often get asked about identifying the mosquitoes before we treat them. There are really only 2 mosquitoes that are going to come into these sites in floodwater zones. You can identify them afterwards if you wish, but they're going to be 2 species. They're our target species, and we just try to get as many of them as we can. The crux of the program and every program is that they're easy to miss. So you have sometimes as little as a 2 to 3 day window to treat these sites between if the water is quite warm, if the ambient temperatures are quite warm, the mosquitoes can develop very quickly. And these are the years where you go out into the woods near the rivers, and there'll be the really tiny mosquitoes, very aggressive, really tiny. Often they sting more than the others. And that's because they've developed very quickly in the water system. They haven't had time to grow between molts. And so we really have to do a lot of the larva monitoring and then try to time it, the treatment, the best we can. This is the habitat. So often we get questions about fish impacts and other sort of riparian impacts. The water that we treat is primarily above the regular high water mark. So, you know, the rivers fluctuate quite a lot. The freshet for us is kind of above the 3.5 meter mark up until 6, some years 6.5, maybe even a little bit more of that, you know, 3 to 4 meters of water. And on a side slope that's at 10 degrees, that's a massive, massive area. The water spreads out, as we've seen, it very, very far. And so the question about high water, we get that a bunch. We can only treat above that high water mark. The high water mark is not the freshet. It's outside the freshet where the water gets. And there's usually a very clear demarcation in the vegetation, and the mosquitoes pick that vegetation. They don't want to be hatching out at regular high water. So they've evolved for just the floodwater, hence floodwater mosquitoes. Often it's canary reed grasses, and then it gets up into the joyful experience of blackberries and cottonwood and that kind of thing. This is last year. So last year was quite a high water year. We weren't anticipating it to be as intense as it was. You can see in the top left, this shows the snowpack in April. And the number that's represented there is percent of normal. So you can see in the half of the snow that influences us down in the Fraser comes from the upper and the middle Fraser River. So the Prince George area kind of down, maybe up a little bit higher. The Chaco obviously feeds into that, but the water coming through those systems from that snowpack is 50% of our input. And you can see last year it was like 125% of normal, 140%, and 115% of normal. So there was a lot of extra snow up there. A big challenge with last year was that May, we had a lot of rain. And that ground that the floodwaters would go into, which normally can absorb some of the floodwaters, was pretty saturated by that time. So when the water came down, and the third challenge last year was that it took so long to come down. You could see the arrow on the right. That's the snow level by day as sort of snow water equivalent. And you could see that as we progressed into sort of early June, that pushed that snow level to the maximums that have been seen in these snow sheds. So that snow waited and waited and waited, and then came down into the system when the system was already warm. So it came down, the water levels went high onto saturated soils, and the warm water produced mosquitoes in abundance and quite quickly. So it was definitely a challenging year from that perspective. This is a graph that shows our treatment. So this is on the Fraser River system. We kind of have two systems. I'll talk in the next slide. The graph on the right shows every ground treatment that we do. So when we're out there, and these ground treatments, let's have to sort of move us up to, 33 hectares kind of in a day, which is a fair bit when you're treating with backpacks, sludging through the water, trying not to trip, trying not to drown. They're heavy backpacks, and we could treat about, a person can treat 2 to 3 hectares per hour, including kind of going to refill the backpack. So we'll do it in teams because it's dangerous to be out there in the water, tripping over underwater hazards and beaver trenches and that kind of thing. But we do a lot of ground treatments early, and then as we're doing the helicopter treatments, we need to touch up the corners. The helicopter is a very, very blunt application, and you can't get into the little corners. You often can't see the little corners of the sort of the flooded channels. So we do a lot of after helicopter work, touching up those little corners. That can be a significant amount of mosquitoes. The helicopter is quite intense. We need to come out with the helicopters when the water is just too high for us to safely access. And then there's just too much of it. You know, if we're treating 600 hectares in a helicopter application, that's impossible to do that by hand. So we really need the helicopter. You can see the river levels on the same axis, but on the right side, the treatment area is way up. So we're treating in excess of 800 hectares in a day. You just can't do that on the ground without thousands of people. Of note, last year's treatments were significantly higher. I think we were in the 2,800, 2,900 hectare range for treatments last year versus just shy of 1,700 the year before. So the higher water is a significant difference. Because the difference to show one of the challenges that we have is we have a very productive mosquito development area on an arm of Stave Lake just above the Hatsig Valley there. And that system is timed differently than the Fraser River system. You can see the freshet water comes through, but the way it moves in that system, you can see that there's an offset with the helicopter applications. And that's as the water in Stave levels keeps sort of coming up in that zone. It only has to come up 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters. And then we had to come back in and monitor and see if there's additional treatment. So that one we treated, I think it was 5 times last year, which is more than ever before, just because there was so much water as it marched up. Just quickly on that one, sometimes there's an efficiency that when we're treating on the Fraser, it's timed to Stave just coincidentally, and we can fly from Matsqui up, treat Stave and come back, and it's a lot more efficient for us. We don't have to fly from the airport loaded because there's no staging zone up there that's easily accessible. 90% of our mosquitoes, we did a lot more trapping this year. 90% of our mosquitoes, kind of as expected, were the floodwater mosquitoes. You can see in the top chart, those came out just before the water started to come down. So we'd been treating in the previous charts, you could see we'd been treating all the way through that. And then the mosquitoes came out right before the middle of July. They came out in mass, and right below that, a really good indicator for us, even if we weren't on the ground, is the phone calls start coming in. They correlate, very, very closely with mosquito abundance. So we knew they were there, and then we knew the people were going to call. We had 3 people answering phone messages. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I wasn't able to last year because I got hit with a pretty severe case of COVID right at that point. So I was out of commission, but the team did a pretty good job keeping up with the phone calls and talking to folks. Most people, when they call, they understand the mosquitoes, why there's mosquitoes, that they're going to go away. Often it's just to vent a little bit, and most people are quite happy. Some aren't, but that's usually the case. So the challenge that we had, just as a quick review, was that delayed onset of the melt coming in on heavy saturated water. The prolonged freshet was another issue we hadn't talked about. We had 40 days above the 5-meter mark, and that gives it way more time for the water to seep overland into new areas, little pockets in the forest that are harder to find. They're not sort of contiguous with the water that comes in the floodwater. So spent a lot of time trying to search for these little pockets through cottonwood forests. And then a heavy reliance on the aerial. There was so much water for so long that definitely that starts to strain budgets because the helicopter itself is quite expensive. So thinking about next year, initially, when you look at this, it looks pretty good. So to describe this, the green line that you see in each of these snow stations, this is where they monitor the snow water equivalent. Each of these snow stations, the green line is last year. So you can see it was high, and it pushed out the maximum on the sort of the early summer, late spring on every single chart. The pink that you see is kind of the 25 to 75 percentiles. So most of the seasons end up in that pink zone. The gray line is the average. The really light gray is maximum and minimums. And then the blue line, surely for us, is that it is quite low. That is the snow water equivalent this year. And under normal circumstances 10 years ago, before the climate sort of really started to get a bit more chaotic, we would assume that we were going to have a pretty good year. but we end up with, I think it was 3 years ago, we had a massive snow addition in March. Last year, the snow could have been a normal year, but it stayed and stayed and stayed. It was playing chicken with us, and then it came out, at the end. So this year, we're hopeful that we will have a more average to below average mosquito year if there's less snow. Sadly, that's usually combined with a high forest fire year, but in any event, this is as good as we can kind of guess at this point. Long range forecasts are talking about an average April, May, whatever that might mean. So we're hopeful that it'll be kind of normal. Fingers crossed, as I've got there. And that's it. Hopefully I didn't talk too quickly. Are there any questions or comments or concerns?
Thank you, Dirk, and appreciate that we've got some new board members around the table. Some of us have seen this presentation before, and it never gets any less exciting seeing this. So, were there questions from new board directors? Director Adamo.
Thanks very much. Dirk, what is it that you actually spray? What is the product that you actually used?
Yeah, that's a good question. I should have put that in there. It's called BTI. It's a corn granule that's impregnated with the bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis, and it's been used for larval mosquito controls for quite some time, and it's the only thing that we use down there. We used to, back when I started doing this, my job was to go around in the back of a pickup truck with a full hazmat suit and a blower spraying organophosphates in individual backyards. So it's come a long way since then, and the only thing that we use is the BTI. It's the only thing practical really for the floodwater mosquitoes.
Thanks. If I may follow up.
Go ahead.
Yep.
With respect to that, so is there a notice that goes out? Because I am relatively new. Is there a notice that goes out to the public in local papers that would say this is the day that we would be spraying via helicopter? Is there any chance of harmfulness to people with breathing problems and things like that?
No, there's not. We hear periodically, but there's no evidence that there's any harmful effects. The active ingredient is a bacteria that's certified for use in organic farming and targets specific to black flies and mosquitoes, really. The main carrier component is corn. So we have on occasion had someone with high allergies that's sensitive working with the pesticide just because of the corn dust, and but never like a pollen kind of allergy. So we don't have that. With respect to the notification, we do have it in papers and sort of social media or any areas that are going to be directly impacted. So Island 22 is an example. We'll make sure that everybody working at Island 22 knows, the regional district knows. Usually we're kind of in the back 40 where people aren't, and most of the places kind of north side of the river, through the what do you call it, the northern Chilliwack, northeast, kind of in that area, all of the residents there know, and we get phone calls if we haven't been out yet. So we're in contact with every big landowner, that particularly places we have to access which have the mosquitoes. So that's our main mode of communication. It's just unfortunately not practical to say, certainly not in advance, but we usually only know 3-4 days in advance of when we'll be going out with the helicopter, and even then it's kind of a 2 to 3 day window, because if it's low level cloud, or if it's raining, or if it's too windy, we have to wait it out. So we can never say we're coming out on Friday at 3 o'clock. Let's say it has to be end of this week. We're going to give it our best. So notification is definitely a challenge. Early season that we do put out the sort of the notification with the pest management plan to the province, so that they know, so people can call them, and in local papers, so that people are aware it's going to be starting up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Director Adamo. Director Dixon, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I'm the director for Area H, which is Cultus Lake and Columbia Valley. Right. And so I have two questions, actually. So are you seeing or hearing calls, I guess, showing concerns in those areas? And I'm asking because I am, and I'm just not sure whether that's common or what you're hearing or learning.
We don't tend to hear, it's not the same kind of mosquitoes up there, so we don't tend to hear the volumes of calls. We do on occasion hear from sometimes campers up at Cultus Lake. We'll hear some from Cultus Lake, particularly if it's a very wet season where there's a lot of sort of temporary groundwater, little puddles in the forest and tire tracks. We'll get some calls, and our efforts there are to essentially communicate with the landowners. Like, you know, you've got a lot of mosquitoes. This is probably what they are. Here's how you manage them. We don't often go up there. Usually it's a phone call, and people understand that, you know, the dog dish is not as innocuous as you might think. So mostly it's a public relations effort up that way.
Is there, like last summer, and maybe it was last summer, like people couldn't really be out in their yards and things like that, similar to people living along the Fraser River Range, I guess. And so maybe this is an FVRD question. I'm just wondering if there is a process, and you know what I should be telling people that are telling me they can't go outside because they're getting eaten alive. So.
Do you want me to take that one, Lance? Well, not hearing. I would ask, people can call us and we can help them out. Often people don't think of every area that the mosquitoes are coming from. We did hear a lot of exactly what you just described last year from all over the province. And we were so wet in May that there was water everywhere. And it was, a lot of it was producing mosquitoes locally. So last year, everywhere was quite a year. Even here, I live in Roslyn in the Kootenays, and it's pretty dry and there's no flood water. And there were times where we didn't like going outside. So it definitely, a year like last year exacerbates it.
I see Ms. Barker's got her light on as well.
Thank you. Director Dixon, I can say that we do have the mosquito control hotline that you can direct residents to, and also pre-season, Lance can send out some messaging that can be of assistance to you to share with residents.
Okay, and Director Horn.
I as well have two questions. I heard what you said, sir, about this being safe for salmon habitat. My question is whether or not the effect of this substance on the chironomid larvae affects them as a food supply for salmonids. Do the salmonids depend on some of these larvae for food at that time of the year? Just thinking from the perspective of salmon enhancement.
Yeah, that's a good question. We've worked in a number of areas for doing salmon enhancement exercises. And what we found is that if you enhance a habitat with salmon in mind, you will very rarely get annoyance floodwater mosquitoes, if it's done correctly, coming from those areas. The salmon mosquito larvae interface for these ones is not that tight. These mosquitoes like warmer water and low oxygen. Those are the triggers for the larvae to hatch. And salmonid love cooler water and high oxygen content. So if you get an area that's going to produce mosquitoes, the salmon are keen enough to get the heck out of there. So we don't often find that. We will find stickleback sometimes in sites, but the mosquitoes themselves are in the system for such a small amount of time. There's very few, if any, sort of base level, sort of trophic levels that depend on them. If they did, they'd be very hungry within 10 days because, you know, they'd eaten and then the mosquitoes are gone. The mosquitoes do tend to feed. The most voracious predators in there are the diving beetles and the dragonfly larvae, and they'll chow down on them while the mosquito's in there. and then they leave the system with the mosquitoes and become flying adults, not the water beetles, but the dragonfly larvae. So they work in tandem to provide food on the surface. So we don't find the interaction between the larvae and the salmon. There was a good, back of Bray Island, behind the Fort Langley campground, some salmon enhancement that went in there, and it was nice. It pulled out a big pocket of floodwater mosquito habitat that doesn't produce nearly to the same level, and the salmon are back using it. So it's a different system. It's a good question, but they're different enough systems.
Perfect. Thank you. My second question is, I come from Mission, and most of the habitable structures that are close to the floodplain are actually commercial or industrial in our areas. So I mostly hear from folks not because they're living close to the floodplain, but because they're shopping down there and overwhelmed going into the stores. Do you how do you determine your priority in terms of where you're going? Is it entirely based on where you think the most mosquitoes are going to be, or is it to some extent based on where the most humans are likely to interact with them?
I think our efforts are fairly similar throughout, and as big as we can get. One of the challenges in the area that you're talking about is Matsqui Island. Matsqui Island in and of itself is bigger than a lot of our whole entire mosquito control programs. And we've spent a lot of time on there cutting trails, finding channels, kind of trying to fine tune our activities there. We've learned since, I don't know, 7 years ago, that the mosquitoes actually come out a lot earlier on Matsqui than we thought. So we do hit that pretty hard early in the season, but there's just so much habitat that we get mosquitoes there. We hear from the Raceway, we hear from the Brew or the Mission Pub. I think is it a Walmart or a Payless or something down there? Lumber yards. We know when the mosquitoes come out. We do put a lot of efforts into treating Matsqui Island. It's a very productive site.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Dirk, for your presentation today. Appreciate it. And yeah, we'll keep our fingers crossed for this year. Next item.
Next item is 5.1, which is the draft Regional and Corporate Services Committee meeting minutes of December 8th, 2022.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Pranger, seconded by Director Smith. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor. Opposed, if any, the item carries. Next item.
6.1 is request for access to records and information under the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act 2022. It's an information item, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions from board members? Director Horton, go ahead.
Midway through the year last year, we talked about FOI and so forth, particularly with the media. Reading the report, it didn't seem like the largest part of the increase was media requests, but I wanted to just verify that. It seems like there's sort of a temperature out there, a larger community temperature of investigating all things government. But did we see a spike in media requests from last year?
I'll have Ms. Van Ness speak to her report.
Through the chair to Director Horn, typically no, that's not a driver that we typically see in the increase of our FOI requests, and specifically in 2022. That wasn't the case.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Director Facio.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to the corporate officer through you, the FOI, does that become a public record at some point? Or can it be requested to be put on a council agenda or something if it comes forward?
Through the chair to Director Facio, do you mean the amount of FOI requests, or the topics, or the people?
Just say a particular topic that's come forward and that's been requested to go onto a regular meeting.
Certainly the Legislative Services Department can compile those statistics, and we can on a regular basis bring that back to the board, as we have in this report, kind of providing general topics that have been requested.
But not specific.
I'd like to avoid providing those specifics.
That's the question. That's the one. That's the question I'm asking. The specific.
Yeah. So the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act really provides that FOI process should be a confidential process, and often the chief administrative officer is not aware of some of the requests being made. We are certainly happy to provide statistics around generalities of the FOI requests, but I would really be cautious about providing specific details.
Thank you. That's the answer I wanted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Van Ness. Other questions?
Yeah.
Director Adamo?
Through the chair to staff, with respect to that, and similar to Director Fascio, would I be contacted, for example, if there was an animal complaint? Would I be contacted in my area?
That's a great question. So through the chair to Director Adamo, it is a confidential process, and the applicants that are making those FOI requests, it's confidential. So you as director wouldn't be made aware if there is an FOI request made in your area.
Okay, thanks. So I'm being contacted right now by 3 different residents of Yale from some dog bites last month that were quite severe, and police officer involved. And I don't know that it was submitted as an FOI, but they're asking for follow-up right now to me. So I'm going to be contacting our bylaws officer. Is that the correct procedure at this stage?
Well, perhaps Stacey Barker could follow up with you afterwards, just with respect to the animal control process.
Thank you.
I was just going to add that there might be occasions where individual elected officials might be contacted by Ms. Van Ness and her team if the FOI request included records that elected officials might be in possession of, or in which case you would be asked to provide those records.
And Ms. Van Ness, and you've probably already, I'm sure you have thought of this already, but just reminding directors of what would constitute records that they're required to keep. And I don't know that we necessarily have to do it now, but I mean, directors should assume that, correspondence that they have on their official regional district email, and even off of official email, should be considered a record if it was asked for under a FOI request. That has to be relinquished.
Absolutely. So any emails or texts, any type of written documents, all are producible under the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. There are certain circumstances where we can redact things and other times where we cannot. So we will be providing some training in 2023 around FOI and privacy and records management. So look forward to providing that education.
And I swear we didn't plan that as a segue into that. Ms. Kinman, you have your light on there, and I know Director Castle has a question.
No, we must have been sharing a brain there, because I think you were going to say a segue into what we've been watching down in the country south of us in terms of the importance of keeping confidential information secure and in appropriate locations.
Absolutely. Director Castle.
Thank you. Through the chair to staff, I've just got 2 questions. The first, I think the question that I heard from Director Adamo is, would the directors be notified if there is a complaint, an aggressive bylaw complaint in our area? I'm curious about that as well.
Ms. Kinnaman.
Through the chair to Director Castle, there may be occasions where if there was an incident in your community that we would certainly notify you. The topic that we're discussing today, though, is the Freedom of Information request. So they're kind of separate issues, but for sure, if there was, if we were notified and there is a service, there is an animal control service in the community, which in many cases there is not. So we may not be aware of it in the case that if there isn't a service area.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I understand. I thought that was the question I actually heard from Director Adamo, so I just wanted to clarify. And excuse me, the other question I had, and I understand we can't get into specifics. I was very interested to see that the Animal Control Service is the #1. Can we get a general idea of what those what those freedom of information requests around the animal control bylaw might be?
Typically, those types of requests are requesting the file for an animal control file for our animal control services, just in a very general sense to answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
Hot topic. Good. Any other questions? Don't see any. So let's move to the next item.
6.2 is nomination for BC representative on Federation of Canadian Municipalities Board of Directors. There's a motion for your consideration.
Thank you. Do you have a mover and a seconder? It's moved by Director Horn, seconded by Director Johnson. Discussion. Director Smith, go ahead. No. Oh, I saw. I thought you had your hand up.
I thought you did too.
Discussion. Nope. Director Dixon, do you have your question?
Are we on the FCM one?
We are.
Yeah. Yes, I understand this, and I gather that Director Adamo was interested in this, which is great. My question really is, what would be the value for Fraser Valley, for our board with this? And I have two actually, and this is a 6-month commitment, so I'm assuming there's another election coming in June, and so there's a lot of ifs here. I guess it's if Director Adamo is successful and if he runs again, this is an ongoing commitment.
Ms. Kinnaman or Director Adamo, if
Sure, I can take a stab at it.
Yep. Certainly members of this board have been represented or represent both the provincial UBCM as well as FCM in the past. I think in terms of value as members of both of those organizations, it provides this organization with a window at the at the front line of advocacy on behalf of municipalities in British Columbia and municipalities and local governments across Canada. We have had some success in the past in terms of major issues that were affecting all of our communities. One in particular at the FCM level I can think of in the past was with respect to those experiencing homelessness. So I think that's the key component of participating at that level. And I don't know if Director Adamo wanted to speak to his underlying interests.
Thanks very much. Yeah, part of my underlying interest was a way of developing a new education, not only for myself, but for within our own organization. And I believe that as I read everything within FCM, I understood that there were a lot of overarching issues right across the country that I could perhaps get a better grasp on and be able to bring some different ideas and some newer ideas back within our own regional district. And I think it would be just a great opportunity to have someone representing British Columbia and be able to present our situation, specifically with those around throughout Canada that are going through the same thing. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity and a good way to get started into this career that I've chosen, or this path that I've chosen. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Adamo. Other questions? Director Smith, go ahead.
Yes. So Mr. Ouellette, actually, I've met with him and they're trying to be more a part of BC. They've always been so well known back east, Ontario, Quebec. He said, we know we're always known there, but they are trying to make inroads here and make a difference. And I think having somebody at the table would really help open that avenue. And I think this would be a good move for us. I'd support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Dixon.
Sorry, I'm devil's advocate today, I think. Is there a cap on the expenses? Because sometimes expense accounts can get a little bit out of control. And so that's the piece that I'm, even though I realize it's regional and all the rest of it paying in, I'm just curious about that.
Ms. Kinnaman.
Through the chair to Director Dixon. In the report, I noted that I estimated expenses for this 6-month period to be approximately $2,000. The information that we were provided from FCM suggests one meeting in Ontario and the other meeting would be held virtually. So factoring in accommodation and flight, I think $2,000 is a reasonable expectation. I'm not certain if Director Adamo or anybody else on our board might put their name forward for the next term and what the requirements might be for FCM expenses beyond that, but this is the item on the table today.
And I'm assuming everything else would follow our expense and remuneration bylaw here at the regional district. So Okay, any other questions? Don't see any. From my perspective, I just, we've done a good job, I think, around this board table traditionally in supporting any director who wants to take some initiative and try and achieve a higher level of advocacy, bring kind of the regional district perspective, bring the Fraser Valley Regional District perspective to both the provincial or national level. And so, Director Adamo, I wish you best of luck. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any, the item carries. Okay, for this next item, because it does, Ms. Kinnaman, involve, there is some discussion around the position of chair. Just to keep it nice and clean, I'm going to declare a potential conflict of interest and absent myself from the chair. Procedurally, because we've never done this, what happens is the remainder of the table will consider a new chair for this portion, for this item to be discussed. I just want to make sure everybody can speak openly and freely about the item. So I will absent the chair. I have, so I didn't blindside him, although I'm not choosing. I've asked or given Director Horn a bit of a heads up, and he's agreed. If the board, by your consensus, do agree after I absent the position, he has agreed to take over and just see this item through. So I will declare conflict and absent the chair.
Thank you, Chair Lum. And just so everyone's clear, we probably won't ever have to do this again, but procedurally, in most instances, the vice chair would just automatically assume the chair. But of course, the vice chair is absent today. So that's why we get to do this nuance in the procedural bylaw. So Chair Lum has suggested that Director Horn could assume the chair. This is not a vote. It's just really by consensus, unless you feel really strongly you'd like to have an election for chair for this particular item. We're happy to take your direction. Director Facio.
Yeah, I'll nominate Director Horn to take the temporary chair for this portion of the meeting.
And do we have general consensus? I see hands raised up. So Chair Horn, item 6.3, which is the Fraser Valley Regional District Director's Remuneration Bylaw 1690. There are some options for the committee's consideration.
Thank you. So what's the pleasure of the committee in terms of the options? Option 1 is to leave things as they are. Option 2 would come into effect December 1st, 23, impacting budget 24. And relates to remuneration of the RACS chair, which was overlooked in the last review. What's your pleasure? Need a mover for one of the options to put it on the table. Moved by Director Facio.
For option 2.
Option 2, thank you. Seconder, Director Smith. Comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call. Oh, Director Dixon, sorry.
I think I've seen this in there, just I want to clarify. So option 2 would be to continue to have the board chair act as the RACS chair, but with an increase in remuneration for that portion.
Ms. Kinnaman, my take is that currently that's the scenario, but if there was a different RACS chair, it would mean compensation of a different director as an add-on. Can you clarify for Director Dixon?
Sure, through the chair to Director Dixon. So the terms of reference for the Regional Corporate Services Committee is that the chair of the board is automatically the chair of RACS. The compensation structure did not contemplate that extra added work. So in any circumstance where there is a new board chair, they would automatically take that body of work on as well. And I would just note that noting the sensitivity of this and not wanting to make it awkward for the current board, in discussions with Chair Lum, we propose that this would take effect into the next next election of board chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Director Facio?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for staff, just for clarification, the motion I've moved, is it just to deal with the chair?
Ms. Kinnaman?
So the motion that you have moved is to recommend 3 readings and adoption to the new bylaw. So within that bylaw, not only would the remuneration for the board chair position change, but we've also made a recommendation that we would come back and review this in October of 2025 in advance of the next election, recognizing that it is a little bit awkward for a new board to be considering remuneration of themselves. And so what I would recommend is that we would bring this back in 2025 before October for you to consider if there are any other changes that are warranted at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. But to be clear, no other director's compensation would be altered to option 2.
That's correct.
Seeing no other hands up, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? Matter carries, and we'll retrieve Chair Lum.
Thank you, Director Horn.
Thank you.
Thank you, directors. Next item.
6.4 is the Human Resources Committee. There's a motion for your consideration.
Thank you. I have a mover and a seconder. It's moved by Director Popo, second by Director Pranger. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor. Opposed, if any, the item carries. Next item.
6.5 is the 2023 holiday closure of the FERD corporate offices.
Thank you.
So moved.
Moved by Director Facio, aka Santa Claus, seconded by Director Johnson. All in favor, opposed, if any, item carries. Next item.
7.1.1 is the 2022 Mosquito Control Program year-end report. An information item if you haven't had enough of this fabulous topic.
Should we do another 40 minutes on mosquitoes, Mr. Lilly? Oh, yeah, everybody's buzzing about it. Yeah. Thank you. Any questions? Nope. Good. Next item.
7.2.1 is the Fraser Valley Regional District Vedder River Campground Amendment Bylaw number 1689.
Okay, it's moved by Director Popov, seconded by Director Horn. Discussion. Director Dixon.
Thank you. Just curious, are you removing the kind of the weekly rates in most cases because they're not being used, or just it's the preference to go day by day?
Ms. Kinnaman or
Sure, I think we'll turn that over to Stacey Barker, our Director of Regional Services.
Ms. Barker.
Thank you. So we've done an analysis of local campsites to see what others are doing. And this is not a common practice, or we're one of the few that are doing this. And honestly, we don't need to be doing it. We're going to be making more money if we don't. There is a lineup of people who are willing to pay the price for this campsites. They're very reasonable still. And so there might be a little bit of extra revenue gained. If we were to, say, expand the camping season into the winter months or something like that, which we're not doing now, then possibly we could look at offering a discount. But right now it's not an issue. We have lots of potential clients.
Thank you. Other questions on this item? Don't see any color. Oh, sorry, Director Costa. No, you're good. Okay. All in favor? Opposed, if any, item carries.
Moving down to reports by directors.
Thank you, directors, for your opportunity. Director Dixon.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm a little distracted today. I'm just a little bit of a heads up, I guess, for the board. The Columbia Valley Cultus Lake Action Committee, they had reached out to media this past week about the ongoing illegal use of land up in Columbia Valley and the landfill site, and that has got the media's attention. So yesterday we had CBC came out, and they were out for actually several hours, met with me, did a little interview, then met with the committee, part of them, and really we're working really hard to try to give them the whole story, and we'll see what happens. That's airing tomorrow. An article was done by the Progress, and I have a phone interview with the Sun today. So it's we really are just trying to get some action on this, some real action, in that we're concerned about our water source, the the site was on fire 3 times. The fire department's been called out 4 times, so it's since Christmas. And really, from what I can understand, it's mostly the plastic burning, and people told me that they had to shut their furnaces off because they couldn't breathe in their houses. So this is just such an ongoing situation. So hopefully we can see some resolutions. It's what Fraser Valley Renewables has been publicly wrote in the paper the other day was that they plan to spread it in March. The emails that I have from the Ministry of Environment say that it's business waste and the only option is removal. So I'm not sure what's going on there. And I do have an update meeting tomorrow, so hopefully I get some answers, but that's where that's at. And so if you see a little bit about that, that's where it's all coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Dixon. And I appreciate your work with the Action Committee. Of course, the regional district, we've, as directed by this board, we wrote some letters on this board's behalf and your behalf. And, you know, I know the Action Committee was kind of the vehicle because it was outside of the jurisdiction of the regional district. The Action Committee was decided was the best vehicle to kind of pursue this forward. I am very happy to see that the Action Committee is getting the ear of the media and seeing and attention of the media, and they're lucky to have you as their spokesperson. Any other questions from board, or sorry, reports from board directors? Director Facio?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a suggestion that LMLGA is in Harrison this year in May. Would it be appropriate to have a resolution put forward to the LMLGA to go forward to UBCM regarding the terrible state of affairs that on this site?
Ms. Kinnaman.
Through the chair to Director Facio, staff were directed by the board to put together some options, and that is one of the options that staff are currently looking at in terms of looking at this more provincially in terms of preventing unauthorized landfills and this happening in other jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Great. Director McConaughey, you had your item.
So this is, I wasn't sure if I should or not as the alternate today, but
we'll allow it. Absolutely.
Anyway, I think some of you know we've been dealing with predating my time as director with rural homelessness, abandoned camps, and a lot of garbage. And it has a lot of effects, environmental effects, fire safety effects, and then effects for people that are actually experiencing the homelessness. So on the 28th of December, a community member, Ross Aikenhead, who's been doing a lot of the garbage organizing, and that contacted me beforehand, and a bunch of us came up, and Mike Peters from Ministry of Forests, he provided funding for an excavator, and different various community members came up, and we had different bins, and there were, so that was the 28th, and there was 12,660 kilograms of garbage taken from the one site. It was right on the river. And then the following day, 1.5 metric tons of metal, plus the Ford Econoline RV from the environment site. This is right past Allison Pool, was taken out. I was contacted beforehand by Global TV and did an interview, which had some really great effects of raising public awareness as well. And then on the 29th, did an article, an interview with the Vancouver Sun. Through that, I've had people reach out from my past work with BC Wildlife Federation, with different former deputy ministers, ADMs, and committee chairs asking if they can help. So I've said absolutely, and we'll get back to them. And then was contacted by the Ministry of Housing, the minister's office, and wanted a meeting. So asked our chair to join me, and MLA Padden, Ravi Kalan, and the three of us met. And the results from that meeting, I'm hoping to hear back. I think we're hoping to hear back next week, possibly, because of the complexity of having different ministries involved, because there's a lot of, I think people, you know, and sort of what we shared is people are really doing the best they can, but there's a lot of finger pointing. Well, this isn't my job. This isn't my job, even inter-ministries. So how do we kind of get people working together to kind of look at this in the bigger picture, maybe possibly doing some pilot projects in the Fraser Valley here, those kinds of things. One thing that came to my attention and through our CAO, Jennifer, is that I had been advised, wrong information, but I've been advised that we provide tipping services for garbage removal for people that, so that was a lot of garbage. I read the amount. So I was informed that all I had to do from the previous director was phone the city, and that this has been done for many years, and then they get the permit and then we go ahead. So, and when I shared that, this is not an approved process and there is no budget. So I'm wondering, we talked to the minister about that. Last night I met with the Residents Association, going to look for some grants, but I don't know what other people are doing for tipping fees when they're finding large garbage removal, but we absolutely, I mean, Area E has a $10,000 budget, which is very small. We can't afford, and we shouldn't be having our res tax paying residents paying garbage to haul out of the valley from this. It's just not appropriate or ethical. So I'm looking for some solutions on finding some funding for that. It is off Crown land. I think the responsibility is with the government. In the meantime, I've been approached because of the media from other groups wanting to come in and clean up garbage, and wanting tipping, and I don't have that. So I'm in a bit of a, I feel like I'm in a bit of a dilemma. I'm not sure what to do because they want to come out and do this. We have 5 sites that have been abandoned. We want to get them cleaned up, and I have no ability. So
yeah, and I think Director Makahonic, you know, we'll I heard in that meeting with Minister Kahlon that he would commit to get us information back in a week, and so that's today. But perhaps we'll follow up, and I think, you know, Director Popov's not here anymore, but in the city of Chilliwack context, you know, we have had the ministries come in and do the cleanup, cover the costs, and there's been an acknowledgement from the province on that. So hopefully that is the answer back that we get.
So with respect, I did meet with Mayor Popov yesterday on this, and he advised me that, and at the meeting, so I'm getting different information here, that the province has never stepped up and paid for tipping.
Yeah, they've maybe not paid for tipping. They've just handled the whole cleanup. Maybe they've taken some of the waste elsewhere. I'm not sure, but okay. I know the camps that have been cleaned up by the province. I'm not sure where they've disposed of the waste, but they've definitely come in and done it, and probably not disclosed, to be fair to Director Popov, probably not even disclosed what how they've handled it. Okay. So yeah.
So open to suggestions and anything. So thank you. That's my my report on I've been a little busy dealing with this, so thank you.
Thank you. Director Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Makahonic, for bringing this to our attention and speaking just in support of what you're saying. I think the electoral areas, if you looked at the residential land base, it might be 0.01% of the Crown land base in our electoral areas. And for us to start taking on the responsibility of financially underwriting the costs of maintaining those Crown lands, that would be a dangerous thing for us to undertake. I know in the past, I've done the same thing. We've cleaned up some of these areas, but really that is not our residents' responsibility. And I think we should make the province very aware of that. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got Director Horn and then Director Smith. Unless, was this on this topic, Director? Sorry, go ahead, Director Smith.
Okay, yes. I love that question, where everybody says it's not my job. You know, it's all our jobs, trying to keep the planet clean. So actually in Hope there, what we did is, in the regional district there, we did $15,000 in cleanup last year. So we ran it by Communities in Bloom, Kiewit, Emil Anderson Construction, Community Forest, and Silver Skagit Mechanical donated everything. So we hauled out truckloads of stuff and we put in rocks. We tried putting blocks in, but they were pretty good at hauling them out of the way because they got that little lift in the top, eh? Rocks make it really ugly to try and get around and move them, get it back in. So, but it's a never-ending problem. And if you can get somebody to come and be a sponsor and do a good show on it. So last year on Earth Day, which I was already doing planning for this year, we did 1,200 tires in one day in Hope. There's not a tire in a ditch or anywhere in the community. So it makes a big difference, recycle properly, everything else. And this year, had a meeting 2 days ago, and Chihuahua's band is now going to do it on 2 different days, cleaning up vehicles on their land. And we have a bin to clean up the tires and everything else. So it's a start, but you have to get somebody to buy into it to run the program. And there are companies out there that get, this is good publicity. Do something positive instead of just an ad. Do something, make a difference in your town. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Smith. Director Horn, go ahead.
Well, before I get to the thing I was going to report on, I'll comment further on Director McHonnick's or a question through the chair to staff. Does staff foresee this as something where we might wish to take a collective advocacy approach, or is it still developing at this point? I'm wondering whether it might belong at an upcoming RACS or larger board meeting agenda as something where advocacy for a provincial approach is what we're calling for.
I think we have some on the books, Ms. Kinnaman, but probably not a bad idea to do a refresher.
Yes, through the chair to Director Horn, I'd be happy to bring a report on this subject and the years of advocacy that we've done, particularly that was driven by the former electoral area director for Area E. We did have some UBCM resolutions in this regard as well, but I'd be happy to bring back an update report.
I'd be happy to see that if that's acceptable to the rest of the board. The item I was going to report on is actually on the same sort of area of collective advocacy. Started to hear from residents in Mission through last year that they were noticing a real change in the way fuel pricing occurs. In fact, the area I live in Mission is right up against the Maple Ridge border, meaning that the 18.5-cent fuel surcharge should disappear when you cross the Stave River, and traditionally has. And that's why there's 4 gas stations in Silverdale, because everybody comes to fuel up there. Over the last year, that price differential not only disappeared, but in some cases was inverted, not to the point of 18 cents, but fuel was actually more expensive. I've CC'd the region on a letter we sent out to multiple fuel companies that are operating in Mission, and essentially asking them voluntarily to speak with their vendors to reconcile the prices to something more reasonable, or suggesting that we might go to the Competition Bureau, or that we might discuss it at this table, because from this director's perspective, if our taxpayers are going to pay an 18.5-cent differential and it goes entirely into the pockets of fuel companies, then perhaps it's time for us to think about whether or not there's actually supposed to be community return on that investment. We're not there yet. I just wanted to bring it up for 2 reasons, just to let folks know that I have put that letter out. I think you'll see it anyways in an upcoming agenda, but also because I'm keen to hear from other directors if they're seeing similar things or have had any kind of similar interactions. Any tips or information would be appreciated.
Thank you, Director Horn, and we'll circle back with you because the City of Chilliwack has had some correspondence as well on that. Director Adamo?
Thanks. Through the chair to staff, I just wanted to thank you through that Christmas period where we had some high snowfalls in our area, as well as garbage interruptions and things like that, and shutdowns of the pool and the arena, and I guess the library as well as the rec center. But I just thought that the staff did a great job in communicating with people, and people kind of understood what was going on at that stage, and maybe perhaps our area is getting a little more used to these weather incidents that are going to occur and going to affect daily operation within our community. But you guys did a great job, so thanks very much. As well, I have my first meeting, I guess, with some staff members here with respect to an application that was submitted in the Hope Standard from the developer of the Sunshine Valley, requesting a highway program, I guess, to add a second lane on the highway, and I'll be attending with that. So it was published in the paper. MOT is involved, and I'll be meeting with staff this afternoon to discuss that type of thing. It's to impact the development that's taking place directly below the Hope Slide. And as it does affect the entire Highway 3, I'll be interested to see how that goes and what it is that they're actually asking of different members. So just to inform everybody that that'll be happening. And I think that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Director. Other reports from board directors? Don't see any more lights on. Just check online there and see Director Seaman is online. Nope. Okay. Next item.
Next is public question period for items relevant to the agenda. And we'll just turn things over to Jamie Van Ness, our corporate officer.
Van Ness.
Thank you. We don't have anybody in attendance in our boardroom today. We do not have any members of the public online, and we have not received any written questions. So we're free to move to the next item.
Thank you. Next item.
Looking for a motion to adjourn.
Moved by Director Facio, seconded by Director Adamo. All in favor, post if any. The item carries. Have a great day, everybody.